Hello, it is a pleasure and honour to be here and be part of this International Agriculture Innovation Conference. I will talk about a trending issue. It's about millets. There is a silent revolution happening. It is not only a comeback of millets, but potentially can be one of the biggest impacts on some of the biggest global issues that we have today. In March this year, the UN General Assembly unanimously declared 2023 as the International Year of Millets. Now, we expect this is more than the usual international year. This is going to be more than just a great promotion and awareness building about millets. The reason is millets can play a key role and contribute to some of the biggest global issues we have today. So what I'll present today is about the value of millets and also about opportunities to leverage that year of millets. So arguably the two biggest challenges we have facing us today, climate change and nutrition and health. With climate change, we need solutions for both adaptation and mitigation. If you see in the graph here, where it predicts declines in yields due to climate change. And we see that Brazil, Asia, and USA, and the North Africa and Middle East have the biggest impacts, almost 10% decrease in yields expected for rice and wheat. And the health and nutrition area, possibly the biggest issues that we have, the three biggest micronutrient deficiencies globally: iron, zinc, and vitamin A. Diabetes is rising, obesity is rising, cardiovascular disease is rising. So we urgently need solutions that cope with climate change, water shortages, soil degradation, malnutrition, and the wide variety of diet-based health issues. We need more diversity on farm. We need more climate-smart, resilient agriculture. We need more diversity in diets, and we need healthier diets. These solutions are around what we call the smart food solutions, or the smart food triple bottom line. Any agricultural food solution needs to be good for you, so nutritious and healthy, good for the planet, environmentally sustainable, and good for the farmer. We have to build that into the solutions. So how can millets play a critical role? So if you look here, there is a wide range of millets. They originate from different continents. There's the kodo millet that originates from Japan. There's millets that originate from India, from China, from Africa. They grow in different terrains. They grow in the tropics, they grow in the drylands, they grow in the deserts, they grow in the Himalayas. Very few crops can survive in such variety of areas. And millets were the staples in many of the countries a while ago. So if you look also how millets are good for the planet and good for the farmer. So millets grow with minimal fertilizers and pesticides, so they have a low carbon footprint. They also survive with minimal water. They can survive with between 350 to 400 mils of annual rainfall. So that uses 30% less water than maize, 70% less water than rice. They survive in higher temperatures, which will be very important with climate change. Also, the millets haven't had the same amount of research invested compared to the major staples, which are closer to a yield plateau. So it has been shown that there's a significant potential to increase the yield of millets. And they have multiple uses. They're used for feed and fodder, they're used as human food, they're used in brewing, they're used in biofuels. Now, if we look at how millets are good for you, and let's look at some of the biggest health and nutrition needs. Now, diabetes. We know it's increasing in all regions of the world. Millions of people die every year from diabetes or diabetes-related issues. So we undertook a study on the impact of millets on type 2 diabetes. This was the largest systematic review and meta-analysis ever done. We identified 80 studies undertaken on humans on the impact of millets on diabetes from 11 countries. And we looked at diabetic, pre-diabetic, and non-diabetic individuals and the impacts on them. So what was found, and this was released only this year, that the average glycemic index of millets is low, and that millets can reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The blood glucose levels were lowered, and the blood glucose levels of those people tested went from diabetic level to pre-diabetic level. The HbA1c, which is the blood glucose bound to the hemoglobin, was also lowered. And so that HbA1c people went from pre-diabetic to normal. So huge positive impacts, very important with diabetes rising significantly around the world. We also looked at cardiovascular disease. Now, this is the leading cause of death globally, and obesity is rising. Over half the world population is either overweight or obese. And if you look at children under 5 years old, 38.2 million children are overweight or obese. So we did a study on the impact of millets on cardiovascular disease. This also was a systematic review and meta-analysis. There were 19 efficacy studies on humans that were analysed. So what we found is that millets can reduce cholesterol and BMI, and hence have the potential to reduce the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. So it reduced overall cholesterol, it decreased what's commonly termed the bad cholesterol, it slightly increased the good cholesterols, it lowered blood pressure, and it reduced BMI level in those people studied. So huge potential. And if we're talking also, if you could diversify the staples, so where people are eating white refined rice and it's 70% of the plate, if you could diversify that with millets, the impact on diabetes, on obesity, on cardiovascular disease could be significant. Now, anemia and iron-based caused anemia is in the top, so iron is in the top 3 micronutrient deficiencies globally. If you look at some of the statistics, 1.74 billion people are anemic. 33% of women at reproductive age are anemic. 40% of pregnant women are anemic. And more than 40% of children less than 5 years old are anemic. So we did a study on the impact of millets on anemia. Now this is about to be released. There were 26 studies found, 15 of those on humans. Analyzing the data, it showed that consuming millets can reduce anemia. Now millets, depending on the type and variety of millets, can be very high in iron and in zinc. And both of those are in the top 3 micronutrient deficiencies globally. And we looked at the bioavailability. So even taking bioavailability into account, you can get, with the right millets and variety, you can get almost your full daily requirement of iron from millets. Now, finger millet is a particularly unique millet. It has extremely high levels of calcium. So it has 3 times the amount of calcium compared to milk. Now we've studied this and also looked at the bioavailability. The bioavailability of that calcium is almost the same as milk. So you can get 3 times as much calcium from the equivalent of finger millet, as you can from milk. And in areas like Asia, where there's a very large percentage of people that are lactose intolerant, this also becomes a very good alternative food. Millets are also high in fiber, they have good levels of protein, and they're high in antioxidants, and they're gluten-free. So that's covering some of the value of millets. Now let's look which are really outstanding and more than we ever expected, and showing how they're a real smart food. They're good for you, targeting some of the biggest needs that we have. They're good for the planet. They're both adaptation and mitigation strategy for climate change, and they're good for the farmer. The resilience that they bring, and the minimal resources, etc., and the multiple uses. So now let's look at the opportunities to leverage that year of millets. So looking at market trends, millets also happen to fit some of the biggest global health food trends. They're a superfood, they're an ancient grain, they're gluten-free, the low glycemic index, being good for losing weight, and their protein levels. Also, there are now in a number of countries urban niche markets starting at taking on millets. They've become a trendy aspirational food. And there is a nostalgia around millets in many of the countries where they were the traditional foods. We created a millet finder to look at the millet products and companies creating millet products around the world, and showed there's been a significant increase. Just in the last 7 years, the number of millet products on the market is really, really rising. I'll show a few examples here that shows the potential. So here are some from Australia. Here, the first one there, the 7 ancient grains, where millets are mixed with the other grains, with rice and others, to diversify the diet. Messy monkey there, it's sorghum that's extruded as a healthy snack for kids. Then you can use millet in smoothies and milkshakes. Here in Malaysia, it's mixed with the other grains, so you can cook it just like rice. Some more from Australia, you have rice and millet pasta, you have breakfast cereals, you have puffed millet added to porridge. In Germany, there's a baby porridge with the millet. You even get a juice, which is pear, apple, and millet juice. Then here in France, millet and quinoa, pre-cooked mix. In USA, it's a millet flake as a breakfast cereal. You get different flours and pancake mix, cake mixes. Here in Hungary, the organic millet balls, so extruded to make a delicious snack. Here in Nigeria, the Milo drink is made with sorghum. In Malaysia, they make a millet milk powder, and then this other one, which is a delicious millet drink mixed with the purple flesh sweet potato. In West Africa, Nestle is replacing wheat and making Cerelac using the pearl millet. Back to Australia, one of the companies there wanted to make the breakfast cereal Weet-Bix, but they needed it gluten-free. So they tested all the different types of millets and found that sorghum acted similar enough to wheat, that they didn't have to change their equipment or processes. So they made a sorghum Weet-Bix. There's other products where here it's 50% sorghum making the little, what used to be called rice cakes. Of course, India has the largest variation of millet products of any country in the world, and very advanced in developing this. So here's some examples: a millet dosa mix, a millet pancake mix. Here you get the extruded millet snacks. Here's an absolutely delicious millet smoothie. You can pop it like popcorn and then also even crush it to make a flour. So it's a very light aromatic flour. Here's an example from the UK where this company, Insane Grain, wanted to create a healthy snack for kids. So they used sorghum. And there's a whole variety of ways that you can cook it. But I think what's quite exciting is that the small millets especially, you can cook it just like rice. So it's a lot easier to diversify the diet. And where maize is a major staple in Africa, the millets can be cooked just like the maize. You can make the same ugali whether you use millet or maize or a combination. Now, just looking at the consumer side, because really to develop this industry, we have to drive it also from the consumer end, because there is low awareness about millets. And where some people do have a knowledge about millets, it's often a negative view as an old-fashioned food. So here's a survey we did in India. Now, it was 15,500 face-to-face interviews across 7 states in India. Now, this is only one country, but I think we can learn a lot of lessons from this. So some of the lessons we learned from this survey, which was published just this year, is that health and wellness were the most common factors influencing consumption of millets. So when we asked people the reason why they consumed millets, number 1 came, I have a health problem. Number 2, I wanted to lose weight. And number 3, I like the taste. So what we found is the easiest group to target were those who had a health problem. And you've seen the huge range of value that millets bring to health and nutrition. So that was the easiest group to target, the first adopters. After that, the second adopters, what we found are people who are health conscious but have a very low awareness about millets and that how healthy they are. There was a big gap between those two groups, so a great potential to increase the consumption and sale of millets. But of course, what we want to do is reach the mass market. So how do you make those millets available and accessible to everybody? And it's about marketing them, and I'll come back to that. So the main approaches, if people wanted to leverage the International Year of Millets, and this is the time because 2023 is not far away, and to have the value chains in place to fully leverage that year, the investment needs to start now. So number 1 there is that consumer awareness and the image of millets is very, very important and needs to be driven and needs investment behind it. Also having modern convenience products are really important. People need that. They're always looking for convenience and of course has to be tasty. Item 3 there is what we find is the startup companies and the social entrepreneurs are the real pioneers that drive new industry, and they are the ones that have driven it in India, and they're going to be very important and should be supported in all countries. 4th there, policy support is important. Typically there is not a level playing field for millets. The traditional crops have been supported and it's very difficult. It's what we call a food system divide, where for decades we've had the vast majority of investment in the big 3, the wheat, maize and rice. So when you invest in something, it does well. So it attracts more investment, so it does even better. So the big 3 have been highly successful and they've been given huge policy support, huge investment. So we need to create a level playing field to support other foods, and policy is critical for that. And then the research priorities. Even the research has had the vast majority go into the big three. Actually, 45% of private industry investment in agricultural crops goes into just one crop. 45%, and that's maize. So we have to invest in these other crops, and millets need to be there. So thank you very much. I hope I got you excited about millets and the future that we have, the great potential and the revolution that's going to happen with millets. Thank you.